Welcome. I am Andrew Warner. I am the Director of Engineering at rapgenius.com. You can follow me on Twitter at wwarner, and you can also follow RapGenius on Twitter at rapgenius. So tweet at me during the presentation, after the presentation, tomorrow, whatever. I'm down. I will respond to your stuff. So this is really exciting for me. This is my first RailsConf speaking, and so I'm super excited to be here. Come on, a little round of applause. Yeah. This is very exciting for me, not just because I'm speaking, but also because you all, this is a pretty full room. You all chose my talk over the other two talks. This is, makes me feel good. It also is crazy because how do you even know what I'm going to be talking about? I have some summary that's kind of vague, like maybe I'm going to say some stuff, but maybe I'm going to change it a little bit. Now I've got this slide on the screen that says Rails Holy Grail. Who knows what that even means? So, I'm excited that you chose me, even besides all this stuff. So, I'm going to be talking today about the Rails Holy Grail. I'm a little bit disappointed that DHH kind of stole my thunder with his Holy Grail slide, but I still am going to use it. I couldn't find another replacement Holy Grail slide in the meantime. So I guess what am I going to be telling you about? Well, first, I'm going to be talking to you about what the Holy Grail is, so what I mean when I say the Holy Grail. I'm going to be showing you some existing Rails solutions that kind of get us close to this. I'm going to be offering up a new solution for your consideration today, and I'm going to show you what else this new solution gets us. So, first off, what is the Holy Grail of the web? This background is like the song Holy Grail by Jay-Z, I don't know. So the Holy Grail of the web, what I actually mean when I say Holy Grail, is the best possible user experience combined with the best possible developer experience. So it should be very easy for me to rapidly develop an application as a developer that is also easy to use for a user. And so what is the best possible user experience? Well, I'm talking about sort of a single-page app, thick client feel. So you shouldn't have to reload the entire page every time the user actually clicks on a link. So like in 2004, when Rails came out, it was really great because it allowed you to create very quickly websites which were kind of a thin client where every single click reloaded the whole page. And this was revolutionary. Before that, it was really difficult to make a site rapidly. And around the same time, actually, Google released this Gmail thing. Kind of hard to see the screenshot, but I think you're all familiar with what Gmail actually is. Gmail was this single-page app where every single click actually loaded right on the same page that you were on whatever content you wanted to see as the user. You didn't have to wait for your whole browser to refresh. This is pretty good. So it's this no full page reloads at all. This is the best experience for the user, and it should sort of feel like a desktop app or a mobile app in terms of the native feel. The best developer experience is a little bit different. So you should be able to use a developer-friendly framework. You should be able to rapidly develop something. You shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. Easy things should be easy. So Ruby on Rails is one of these frameworks. You might have heard of this, kind of why we're here today. So you should be able to use a developer-friendly framework. You should be dry. You shouldn't have to repeat yourself. D-R-Y, don't repeat yourself. But actually, what I mean here is more like derv. So what is derv? Well, I mean, you shouldn't have to repeat views. You shouldn't have to write one set of views that lives on the client's browser and one set of views that lives on your web server. You should be writing mostly one language, at least insofar as views are concerned, so you shouldn't have to context switch. Context switching is very expensive, sort of switching from Ruby and Rails to JavaScript. This is difficult for us as developers. And your website should be SEO friendly. So I guess this part really applies to content sites. So I work at rapgenius.com. Content and SEO friendliness is extremely important for us. We lost a bunch of traffic when we actually got banned from Google for a little while. This showed us exactly how important SEO was. So your site should be able to show a crawler, a search engine crawler, HTML that it can index and then make available for users searching. And so what is the closest thing to this Holy Grail today? Well, it's kind of the Node.js. There's a Node.js solution that I think is the best thing. Come on, boo, Node.js. Give me some boos. So there's this Airbnb render framework, right? So this says, render your Backbone.js apps on the client and on the server using Node.js. So this framework is, pretty easy to use. You write your Backbone.js client-side app, and the client can sort of incrementally update the page in this sort of Gmail-like experience. And then the server can also render full HTML pages for arbitrarily deep links. So the user can still see full HTML page if they get deep linked, and a web browser, or sorry, a web crawler for a search engine can also see HTML. So this, I think, is the best solution right there, right out there today. And here I've actually built like a little demo app using render to show you how cool it is. So this is a little bit washed out, but this is sort of a mini version of our site, Rap Genius. So Rap Genius allows you to view documents and read documents and also read inline annotations on those documents. And the annotations are meant to provide context and also explanation if something's complicated, and just add to the text. So here I've built Rails Genius, which allows you to add context to like Rails talk abstracts. So this is my talk, and I've added some inline annotations here. And the point I'm trying to make is that we should be able to, when I click this link to app views, which is actually an annotation, this shouldn't refresh the whole page. It should just load in the part of the page that changed, which is a much better experience for the user. So if I actually click on this, it just loads that part of the page. This is something that might be familiar to you from using apps, but it's kind of hard to like do this out of the box in Rails. And also you should be able to like edit it right there, and that should just snap in the edit view, etc. And this should not be too difficult to build. Looks like I lost my internet connection. There we go. So this kind of stacks up pretty well. It's dry. We have one set of views. It's SEO friendly. We can serve HTML to crawlers. It's a thick client feel. It's a single-page app. You mostly write one language. It's Backbone, JavaScript, etc. But it is not Rails. So I think it still took me a while, even with this render thing, to like create an app that was good. In Rails, it's just much easier to create like the vanilla example apps using like scaffolding or even not using scaffolding. It's just way faster for development. So I still think this is bad, even though it's the closest thing to the Holy Grail today. But my point is that Rails, I'm worried because I think Rails is kind of getting left in the dust in this respect. Like there's not really like an established solution for building like a thick client, good experience Rails app. And so now I'm going to show you some sort of solutions that get partway there. So let's look at those. So one option, and this is kind of a joke, but it's a serious thing that people actually do, is creating one version of your app that lives on the client and one version of your app that lives on the server. And so, in this example, you would write ERB or HAML on the server, and then you would have an API that returns JSON from the server to the client, and then the client would figure out how to render new parts of the page that it wants to snap in using like some kind of front end like handlebar or _JS templates, right? So this seems kind of reasonable. But the problem is, if you forget to update both templates at the same time, you're going to end up with some inconsistency between the client and the server in terms of the logic. And this can be very, very dangerous. It can lead to some hard to suss out bugs. And we all know dry is a good thing to strive towards. So this doesn't stack up very well. It's not dry. It's SEO friendly. It's a thick client. You didn't write mostly one language, though. You had to write a bunch of stuff on the client and the server. And we only get a half point for Rails. So we got to spend a lot of time still on the front end noodling around there. All right, so turbolinks is something you also might have heard of. You might be thinking, well, I can just do this with turbolinks. This is like a one-liner, right? So turbolinks, the way it works, is you write just one set of views, and then when the user clicks on a link, you can just pop in the whole new page but save the browser instance. So you save on this overhead of like parsing and compiling CSS and interpreting JavaScript and running all this stuff. It's actually kind of expensive to spin up like a browser instance for the client. So you eliminate all that overhead, and your client is extremely simple. You basically have to write no JavaScript. So the problem is that turbolinks kind of ends there. There's nowhere else to go. If you want to snap in like just a new part of the page, you've got to write some kind of custom controller action that just returns that part of the page, and then you've got to use like some jQuery soup type thing to like snap that in, and then you're relying upon your page structure. So that is not a great solution. But this works pretty well if you're trying to do, depending on what you're trying to do. So, this is dry. It is SEO friendly. It's not really like a proper thick client, though. It's kind of like a fake thick client. Feels almost like a thick client, not quite there. Mostly write one language. We got that covered. We've also got Rails covered. So this is kind of why turbolinks is so popular, I think, because it basically does what you want without much hassle. So there's also this Ember, Angular, Backbone type movement now. You might have sort of seen, there are a bunch of talks about this. People allude to it all the time. This is sort of a new way. This is the new wave of building Rails apps. So you just have a JSON API in your server. That's it. Your entire app experience lives on the client, so it lives in JavaScript or CoffeeScript, what have you. And the initial page load, the first time your user visits the site, they download like this whole JS app thing, and then that sort of boots up and figures out how to like render the site. And so this might remind you of new Twitter. So Twitter in like 2010, I think, released this new experience where they were claiming this exactly. They were saying this is going to be much better for our users because we can just sort of like snap in a new tweet when you click. And they actually found that this was kind of costly. Like sometimes it would take 10 seconds to render a 140-character tweet because you had to download like all these assets and then like that would sort of like boot up, spin up, and build a page. This isn't like an actually good experience for users, at least the first time they visit the page. This is actually pretty bad. So it doesn't quite stack up great here. It is dry. It is not SEO friendly though. And now there's some tricks to sort of making it SEO friendly, but for the most part, it's kind of hard to make it, allow your app to like serve HTML to a crawler. Now, if you're not building a content site, maybe it doesn't matter, but my claim is this is pretty important on most websites. It's a thick client. You don't get to write mostly one language. Half of it's JavaScript. So again, half point for Rails. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that each of these things makes like a key trade-off that we can't live without. So what are we actually going to do about this? Well, now I'm going to show you like a new solution that, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. And actually, this starts with a sort of like admission. So I kind of lied to you before. I told you I built this app that I was showing you before using render, which is this like node.js thing. The truth is, I don't even know JavaScript. I don't even know anything about node.js, render. I just read about it, right? I actually built this app using this new sort of like technique / library called Perspective. So again, here's the same app. And just to remind you, you can kind of click around here and things just sort of load. And this is a very simple example, but things are snapping in, just the parts of the page that are changing need to get changed. And you can sort of like edit and save stuff, and we're just sort of updating parts of the page that need to change. And so this is this perspectives thing, which I'm claiming is better, right? So let's see how it stacks up on the chart that I just made. It's dry, it's SEO friendly, it's a thick client, you write mostly one line. I think you see where this is going. And it's Rails. So I checked all the boxes in my own talk. This is a key thing. You have to be able to do this. If you're going to speak at RailsConf, you've got to have a chart, checks all the boxes. This is good. So, the key sort of thing here, the key part of perspectives is that we want to be able to share our templates between the client and the server. So, like, the server should be able to render full HTML, and the client should be able to, like, receive JSON and, like, render a template, right? This is sort of the appeal of something like render. So here, let's say we thought, well, maybe we can sort of share templates. Maybe we can share our existing ERB templates. Those are pretty easy to write. So here's like a simple ERB template, right? We're just generating like a link to a user. We're using the name as like the anchor text. We're using a user URL helper from Rails to like generate a link to it. This is pretty simple. You might imagine that using something like Opal, which transforms Ruby into JavaScript, you could like port your whole server kind of like instance, including all these helpers like link to and user URL, to JavaScript, and then you could just dump down your ERB template, and then that could get sort of rendered on the client. This might, you might think that this works, but actually you can kind of do more stuff in ERB than you might sort of be aware of from simple examples. Like here's an example where I'm actually just running like a SQL query in an ERB template, and this I think demonstrates like the fundamental difference. Yeah, boo. This, I think, demonstrates like a fundamental difference between the client and the server is that they're kind of in different environments. Like the server has access to resources that the client not only doesn't have access to, but shouldn't have access to. The client should not ever be able to like hook up to the database and ask some questions, right? So, and the client is the same. Like the client knows stuff about the user's browser, like they can inspect local storage and all this stuff. Like they're fundamentally different environments. And so I don't think like any of the existing templates out there really get you this sort of shared environment for free. So the way, the way to get to a shared template between a client and the server is to find the lowest common denominator. So like if you've taken calculus at the graduate level, you might have heard of the lowest common denominator. It's the way that you are able to, like, if you're trying to add fractions, you can, like, multiply the denominator. The point is, it allows you to, like, find some common ground between, the client and the server, right? So we need lowest common denominator, which is the dumbest possible template. So we need something that's really dumb that basically can't do anything. And so what is that? Well, that's Mustache. Mustache are the dumbest templates out there. Don't tell them I said that. They're probably in the other room or something, but they're pretty dumb. You might have heard Mustache templates referred to as being logicless. I actually think logicless is kind of like a bad way of describing it, because when I hear logicless, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, I can't write like an if statement. There's probably no like for loop situation. Like, what else can I do? Well, I probably can't do like an if else. Like, the reality is you can actually kind of do that stuff. It's called a different thing. So I don't like using the word logicless. It's more like you can't run arbitrary code. It's more like no code, codeless or something. So you can't run arbitrary code. This is the sort of takeaway from Mustache, right? And so, this is kind of cool because you can't run arbitrary code, we can write Mustache template renderers in all these different languages. So you can easily render Mustache templates in Ruby or JavaScript. If you want to use one of these other languages, these are terrible, but I guess you could use like .NET or something if you wanted to render a Mustache template in .NET. I don't know what you're doing, but you might be able to do that. So to show you like how to create a Mustache template, I want to look at like a specific example. So here's like the Rails Genius app, and in the lower left-hand corner here, there's like an annotation, right? So this is sort of annotating the line node.js. And if we sort of zoom in on this thing, we can see there are a few different components. There's the section of text that's annotated, so we'll call that the referent. This is like a fancy word for like reference or something. So we'll call that the referent. That's the line that I highlighted and explained. And then we'll call this the sort of body. And you notice the body can contain like arbitrary HTML. There's like a link to nodejs.org, a link to Ruby on Rails, etc. I'm sort of adding like, I'm adding hypermedia here because it's the web. And then there's this edit link, right? And so this edit link, you might imagine, should appear for some users and not others, depending on like what your permissions are, what your sort of situation is. And so Mustache, the template for this, the whole template looks like this. So I'm going to go into like the specifics of how I would actually, what this is doing. But here's the template. And to render this, I just need this hash of JSON data. So I can render this anywhere as long as I have this hash. Key thing to remember. So if I can't run code in Mustache, like I can run code in ERB, how do I actually like put data in the markup, which is like the whole point of templates, right? So you can use these tags, right? So given this section of JSON, you have a referent mapping to node.js, right? We can render that data into this template with inside of a block quote by using this double curly brace thing. This just says like basically gsub, or actually not gsub, sub this referent inside this block quote. Pretty simple. So this is just going to print like block quote node.js. That should hopefully be fairly self-evident. So if you want to sort of do something where you're printing raw HTML, the double brace will actually escape it. So that's most of the time what you want, but in this case we're actually like, we want hypermedia in that annotation. So this actually has an href, an a tag rather. And so we're going to use the triple brace, which is another type of tag which says print this HTML raw. So this will actually print out like real anchor tag, which is in this case what we want. So here is the sort of meat of Mustache. This is probably the trickiest part of Mustache. There's another type of tag, which is this sort of double brace hash block, right? So here is the block that I'm talking about. So you can see this double brace, and then there's hash edit. This hash is kind of where the logic by another name comes into play in Mustache. So this is going to, if edit is like a Boolean type thing, it's going to run or go into the block if edit is true. If edit is like a list of something, it basically is your for loop, is the way to think about it. There's one more thing, which is that if edit is like a hash, it kind of just will run the intersection if the hash is there, otherwise it won't. So in this case, we're just saying, we should show the edit link. That's what edit true means. This is our logic by another name. And then we're actually, grabbing the edit href from the JSON hash as well. And so this will result in just printing the edit link. Now, if edit were false, it wouldn't print that. And so you might be asking, like, well, what if I wanted to do something else? Like, I'm used to writing these if-else statements. So Mustache also has this other sort of tag, which is a caret. So there's like double squiggly, double curly brace caret edit, which just means sort of go into this block if edit is unset or false. So this is the kind of last tag. So in this case, if edit were false, we would just print can't edit. So this is Mustache. That's basically all you can do. So how does this actually help us? Well, I don't know if you guys remember, but at the beginning of this Mustache section, I showed you this template, and I said all you need to render this template is this hash. And I also told you that there's a Ruby library for this and a JavaScript library for this. So I think you might see where this is going. If we have some way of generating like a hash anywhere, then we can render it. We can ship the template and the hash to any environment and like render it there. That's the point I'm trying to make. So how do we actually generate this hash? That's the sort of tricky part. Well, I'm going to do some hand waving here and say, this perspectives library might help us a little bit. So here's a traditional Rails view. This is like an ERB template, right? And so what I'm saying is that if we split this into a template, which is Mustache, and a perspective, which is something, it's a new type of object, then we can just have this data transport thing, which is just the hash, which is generated by the perspective, and then we can render the template anywhere. So this is how we render on the client or the server. So what does this perspective thing look like? Well, as you might imagine, it's a bunch of stuff that specifies what is in the hash. So here's the whole perspective. I'm going to dive into different parts of it, but you can see it's just basically a Ruby object with like some macros thrown in. That's sort of the goal of the library. It should just be a Ruby object, plain Ruby object. So you can specify inputs, which you specify with params. So you could say param annotation, this perspective expects an annotation as input. You can specify outputs. This perspective outputs referent, which is the annotation's referent property. It also specifies body as a key, and that's the annotation's body as HTML, so this is going to be raw HTML. So properties are output. And so these are actually just keys in this hash. So we can just turn this perspective object into a JSON object, and then that can be rendered anywhere. So now that we know what this perspective object is, it should be pretty self-explanatory how we get from the right over to the left and render this template. Now you might be thinking, isn't this just like a fancy version of like helpers or something, like helpers with like a namespace? And it's actually different because helpers are sort of operating at, they seem like they kind of live in their own separate object, like annotations helper or something, but actually they're in a global namespace which can be called from any template at any time, and so they can kind of like overwrite each other. They also are direct function invocations. So this is just data. This hash in the middle is just data. So like if you reference a property twice, you're always going to get the same value, unlike a helper, which could theoretically return different things if you call it different times. So it's kind of like a safer thing for us as developers. And so to build like an app with this, you can imagine the initial request that the client makes will receive HTML. So the server will say, okay, let me take this perspective thing, turn it into JSON, render a Mustache template, and then send that back to the user. And in the case of like new Twitter, the user would just see the 140-character tweet rendered. And in the case of like a web crawler for a search engine, it would see like the full HTML that it can then index. And then subsequent requests, just like we would do with like Ember or Backbone or whatever, we just request JSON from the server, and then we render the part of the page that needs to change. So, the key thing here, I think, is that HTML is unstructured data. And so a lot of like sort of Rails patterns will tell you just return like the snippet of HTML from the server that you need and then snap that in somewhere. And that eventually leads to like soupy code and coupling to like classes on HTML elements, which leads to a lot of like weirdo bugs that are hard to track down. JSON, on the other hand, is structured data. It's a lot easier to deal with this. So you can either render it or you could do something on the client that's a little fancier if you want to update different parts of the page, whatever. The point is that it's structured and it's easy to deal with. And if you're building out like a thick client, you want to couple your client experience to structured data, not unstructured data. All right, so I'm going to do the quick getting started. This is sort of about this library, but I don't want it to be all about this library. So it's just a gem. You can just generate the install for it. That'll like make your app perspectivified. You can scaffold stuff. you break your ERB templates into Mustache templates and a perspective, and you just add this one line to your controller. So this just uses a responder to figure out if the client wants HTML or wants JSON, and turns the perspective into whatever you want. So in this case, it's just find this annotation by ID, use this little macro to create your perspective, and pass it the data it needs, which in this case is like an annotation, and then we can render a JSON version or an HTML version. So what else does this buy us? So clearly this rendering on the client and server thing is pretty good, but actually I didn't set out when I was thinking about this to build some sort of new thick client framework thing that competes with Ember. That wasn't my goal, and I'm still not sure that's my goal. The benefits I'm about to tell you about were actually the initial inspiration for wanting to build this library. So number one is separation of concerns. So I really hate seeing ERB templates like this. Here is an ERB version of the template I just showed you. So instead of having a nice edit property, there's often some logic in here, if you look at the bottom there, that's checking whether or not to show the edit link. And this is kind of ugly. It's kind of ugly no matter where it lives, but it's especially ugly if it lives in a template. And it is so easy to do this with ERB, because ERB literally just means embedded Ruby. So you can just write anything, like I've been saying. So here we're saying the person can edit the annotation if they created it, or they're a super admin type user. So Mustache and perspectives force you into this separation of concerns where you literally can't write any code in your template. So you have to put it in the perspective, which is just a Ruby object, which is where it kind of belongs. And there's no love for this in ERB land in Rails. You're kind of off in this wasteland of I guess I'll throw some view logic in here, and I don't really know where it's supposed to go. And so this leads me to so here's the perspective version of it, where we actually just generate this edit property and say whether or not we want to display the link based on that logic I showed you before. So this also gives you testing. So I know DHH was shitting on this in his talk. I still think testing is important, maybe not TDD, but the point is, if you wanted to test an ERB template and it had some logic in it, you would have to render. The only thing you can do is render the template. You can't talk to it. It's not an object. You can't ask it questions. All you can do is render it and then do a string match on it. And in fact, I've seen a ton of tests like this. WebDriver tests are basically just doing advanced regexes to figure out if the logic is right. And this is really bad. A perspective is just a frickin' object. You just new it up and pass it the data it needs, and then you can test your logic. So here I'm just creating a test double. Test doubles are important in testing. Test double for a user, test double for an annotation. I'm creating this new perspective, and then I'm asking it if the edit link is true and verifying that it should be showing that. So another thing is caching. So this is maybe a little bit difficult to motivate, but this sort of cache digest thing, Russian doll caching thing is kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around, right? You have to write sometimes a special comment in order to get the templates to know about each other. Not as good as just having objects that know about each other. So if you want to cache an annotation show perspective, you just use this cache macro, and that says use the annotation as the cache key, right? And so if you're familiar with cache keys in Rails, if you're using generational caching, this will just say the cache key, hopefully you can see this, is just the type of object, the ID of the object, and when it was last updated. So this will fall out of cache if anyone updates the annotation, or if it's a different annotation, it'll have a different cache key. So this sort of hopefully is somewhat familiar. If you have another template that you're rendering, here, this annotation show perspective is rendering a nested users/avatar perspective, so you can see that at the bottom. You might want to say, well, if the user updates their avatar, we also want this to fall out of cache. This is sort of the Russian doll caching of it all, right? So if the inside Russian doll is uncached, then it should bust the outside Russian doll's cache key. So this thing you can also assign a cache key to. You can say cache based on the user. So if the user gets updated for the user's avatar perspective, we want this to fall out of cache. And so, like I said, we want the whole thing to fall out of cache if the user gets updated or the annotation gets updated. And so what perspectives will do for you is say, okay, we know that there's a nested user's avatar perspective here, and so to generate the cache key for this whole thing, we're just going to concatenate the cache key from the annotation and the cache key from the user and produce this ugly, terrible, long cache key, which you don't have to worry about. at any point as the writer of the code. So this is all sort of handled transparently for you. So are we ready to drive off into the sunset in Rails land now with this new stuff? Well, not quite. The point I'm trying to make here is that, or one thing I want to get across here is that this is sort of a nascent library / weekend project motivated by, making it annoying to do caching and it's hard to kind of separate your templates out. And also, I'd like to be able to render the same thing on the client and server. But there's still a bunch of stuff to be done, right? There's still some work to be done to integrate this with existing front-end frameworks if you want to add a bunch more rich experiences on the client. And I want to get to the point, though, where we can have a good answer to these node.js libraries. This is a big motivation. I'm tired of node.js being well, let's just embrace JavaScript. No, let's not embrace JavaScript. Ruby is better. So let's get at them. But the key takeaway is you shouldn't be sort of creating one version of your app that lives on the server and one that lives on the client. The ideal situation is move most of the stuff to the server, but be able to still create this thick client situation. So that's it. That's my talk. You can check out this library by going to rapgenius/perspectives on GitHub, or if you're lazy, there's this bit.ly link, bit.ly/rgperspectives. And also, as I said at the beginning of the talk, we are hiring, so if you're sort of interested in this kind of stuff or other stuff, Rap Genius related, get at me. Hit me up on Twitter. Hit me up via email, andrew@rapgenius.com. And I think we have time for some questions.